switch on video. Okay. So again, let me express my thanks to Nirvram for inviting me to give this series, which has lasted for about 6 months or something. It's quite been a long time. It's been really nice. But I say I will be carrying on. I'm going to try. I'm looking for a volunteer somebody to host it in these buildings, which makes it easy. And it'll be the same time on Sunday at 10 o'clock. So that's when we start. And we're going to continue with that book there, there you go. This book here, which for participants in my shiur is a mere, how much should I sell that for? $20, whatever that is. And yes, show it to the camera. Yes, you should have this in your bookshelves at home. So truly great Jewish woman then and now. We only really started it. We've not nearly got through this. If you're new, then basically the theme of the book, I hope you can see the brilliant graphic designed by my favorite artist, me. And it's a silhouette of a lady's face or head. And then as the grains of sand are going through the what do you call that thing? Hourglass, yes. Then there's another lady's face being formed at the bottom, and it's called Truly Great Jewish Women Then and Now. So the idea was to look afresh at the lives of the great women of Tanakh, whom we all think we know all about. So I delved very deeply into Kabbalistic Sforim and Hasidic Sforim to find aspects of their lives that people hadn't heard about or weren't so familiar with, retold their story in the light of those discoveries. And then after each chapter, there's a contemporary Jewish woman whom I knew as the wife of my teachers, or the wife of my chavrusas, or my talmidos from seminaries, who walked in the same footsteps. So that's the general idea of the book. And so we're going to be carrying on that series, and then we'll see what we do after that. So I don't know how to let you know about this. Jennifer, could I email you and tell you? All right, so once I get a location, you can just ask our wonderful hostess, who's been so kind, and you'll know where we are. Good. Last year. Now, when Janice asked me for the titles, I think I got the title wrong because I said, learning from Yehudah, its approach to Rosh Hashanah, but it's really Yom Kippur. Yes, it should have said Yom Kippur. So that's what we're doing. Yehudah's approach to Yom Kippur and how to follow it, which is obviously very mysterious. What does that mean? But let's start at the very, very beginning. I think you're all familiar with the idea. You find it in the back of, when you finish the Amidah, the Shemona Esra, there is sometimes a whole list of various psukim which you should or can choose to say, and apparently it's the Sechus, this posuk will mirror your name. Do you know, have you come across this? So it's either that should introduce myself after 6 months. My name is Yehudah Yoina, right? People know me as Rabbi YY. And I think people think, when at my briefs, Koresh Shmobi Yisrael YY. But I do actually have names. And Yehudah Yona. So the Yud and the Hey are, by coincidence, the two letters appear in both of my names. So basically, you find the posuk which has those in it, right? And that basically is something you're supposed to say every morning. Of course, there's a hint to that as well, that your name contains, as it were, your mission in life, what you're here to do, who you're here to become, because it's all contained within your name, which is interesting, huh? And I think we mentioned before in one of our earlier shiurim, Rabbi Desta says in Miktzah Miliol, in the Chelik Daled, if I remember rightly, page 126, showing off, that basically a person can go through their entire life and not really know exactly who and what they are. But if we believe that we've been sent here in order to maximize our potential, and as I said once, if you remember right at the beginning, I very often, when I'm signing copies of my books, and that's not a hint, but I very often write the best bracha I can ever think of giving anybody, and I'm now going to give it to everybody, whether you've bought a book or not, it doesn't matter. And I think it's a fantastic bracha. And it is, you ready with your omens? You should have a life of achievement. Because if you've got a life of achievement, you have achieved what you're supposed to achieve. You become the person you could have and should have become. You've helped the people you could have and should have helped. You've done the things you should have done. And that's a good feeling about yourself. Conversely, if you've gone through life and you don't feel that, then your life's a frustration. And there's a beautiful idea, I'm not sure I've told you this word. They've got two words in Hebrew that are the exact same letters, and two of the letters remain in the exact same place, but one letter travels from the front of the word to the back. The word is oneg, and the other word is nega, right? So how would you translate oneg? Oneg as in oneg Shabbat. What would you say oneg is? Pleasure, something pleasurable. Right? And then there's nega. What's a nega?
Blemish?
It could be a blemish, it could be a disease, pestilence, that sort of thing. So the idea is like this. And the ayin, so the letter that's moving about is the ayin. So if you've got the ayin at the beginning of the word, it spells oneg. If you take it and then nun gimel. If you take it and move it to the end of the word, you've got nega. And the idea, it's a beautiful idea, and it's such a good idea that both the Hasidim and the Lithuanians claim it as their own. And you always know that something's really good if both the Hasidim and the Misnagdim think that, if it's either the Vilna Gaon or the Baal Shem Tov, that's when you know you've got a real treasure. And it goes like this: if the ayin is open at the beginning, then life's an oneg. If your eyes are wide open at the beginning, life's an oneg, it's a pleasure. However, if your eyes only open at the end, then your life's a nega. If your life is, if only I had, I wish I had, then it's a life full of frustration. Whereas, on the other hand, if your eyes are open at the beginning of your life, then you grab the opportunities that come along, and then it's an oneg. So to wish somebody a life of achievement is an incredible thing. So that's my usual favorite brocha. So basically, when we're looking at our names, the idea is you're supposed to be maximizing your potential. We've talked as well in the previous shiur about reincarnation, which seems to be a fundamental, certainly in Kabbalistic terms, of Judaism. Some people don't like the idea, but it seems to me to be very mainstream. You can prove this because it's in the Art Scrolls Seder. So it's certainly got left the mysterious pages of the Zohar and Kabbalistic books. If it's in the Art Scroll, then you know it's now become very, very mainstream. So basically, we're here either from a previous life to achieve what we failed to achieve, or to repair the damage that we did. Or if you don't like to believe that, you just want to talk about here now, you're here in order to maximize who you could be. But the question, of course, always is, how do I know who I could be? If Rabbi Dessler says you can go through an entire life and not discover who you are, well, if the doctor doesn't know what the symptoms are, if you don't know what the source of a disease is, you can't cure it. If you're only dealing with the symptoms, you're not curing the disease. You've got to get to the source of the disease. So what am I? What is in me that needs to be repaired, needs to be corrected, needs to be maximized? And once you've done that, you've become the person you could have become. You're here. You've fulfilled your tachlis in being here, which is a nice thing to do. But what is my tachlis and who am I? Well, it can be hinted at in your name. So that's most Sidurim, including the Art Scroll. Today's shiur is sponsored by Art Scroll. In the Art Scroll, you can find, it's 690 something at the back or whatever, you'll find a whole bunch of names. So just look at your name and it tells you a posuk. Mine, you might be interested to know. Mine is Tehillim 120, and it's verse 2. So, Hashem Hatzilo Nafshi, Almighty, save my soul, misfas sheker, from words of falsehood, no flattery and lies, Rubinstein, umiloshin remiyah, and trickery. That's not how I saw myself, but who knows? There may be something there that I have to worry about. So, because everybody is interested in who they are, what they're supposed to be, and what they're supposed to do. And I think, you probably know, there's a famous Gemara, Rabbi Dessler talks about this, but and the Gemara talks about Rabbi Meir Medaik B'Shmo. If somebody had a problem, let's say it's a husband and wife and they're not getting on, as an example, so they come to Rabbi Meir, the famous Rabbi Meir of the Gemara. And Rabbi Meir would say to them, what's your name? Now, he didn't ask them to write their name. It wasn't handwriting analysis, because there's such a thing, there's a chokhmah like that. But rather, he just wanted to know what your name was. And when you said you were Rivka Leah Bas such and such, and your husband said he's whatever, Avram, Shmuel, Ben, whatever, hearing those names, he would be able to automatically understand where the tensions in your relationship lie, because the name is a glimpse of the content of who you are. Because you are your name. You are your name. There's only 2 times that I know of that you're guaranteed to have Ruach HaKodesh in your life. One is at the end of your life. A person in their last days, on their deathbed, then what they say carries tremendous significance. This is why Yaakov called his children on his last days to give them a blessing. And we're told, Rashi already says, the Shekhinah was present at the foot of his bed. And what a dying person says to you, the bracha you get from the Alta Zeta, whatever it is, the Alta Boba, is, we consider that to be very significant. The other time I know that you're guaranteed to have Ruach HaKodesh is when you come to choose a name for your child. Because even though, and if you remember, going back, assuming you all went through this experience, when it was the first time you were expecting a baby, there's weeks and months of debate and discussion with your husband as to exactly what name you're going to choose. But in the end, ultimately, the name that you chose for your child was the name that Shemayim put into your head. Because the name contains what the child is. If, for example, to explain it a little bit further, if I had a whiteboard here, which I nearly have, however, I'm not going to start to get my pen and drawing in Janice's wall. She might kill me. But anyway, if I was to write the following, right, can you see? I'll do it up here because the camera is probably in the way. If I write this, can we do this? Good fun, this is like a good game. What's he writing? That's a W-A-T-E-R. And then underneath that I write H2O. What have I done? I've written the same thing twice. Not quite. Water is what we've decided in English to call the stuff. In Spanish, Italian I think, and certainly in Latin it's called agua. In German it's called Wasser. It's Vada in Russian, I seem to remember. And it's called Eske in Scots Gaelic. Just thought you'd like to know. Eskebech became the word whiskey, water of life. But how I know that, I just don't know. But water is what we decide to call it. So if, let's say, we wanted to found a new country or a new language, like J.R.R. Tolkien was always inventing new languages, and we decided to call water, and we want to invent a new name for water. Don't be shy. This is your chance for fame and immortality. And incidentally, we're getting to 1,000 hits in our shiur every time, which is really fantastic. Anyway, so let's just say we'll call something silly, Bobbly Boop, right? As long as we all agree that Bobbly Boop is the name for water, and I say, could I have a glass of Bobbly Boop, which again, Janice has brilliantly supplied for me in illustration, then, I'm not sure, then that's fine. But H2O tells you what it is. It's hydrogen and oxygen in ratio 2:1, right? And that's what it is. That's what it's inside water. So water, the word water is what we agreed to call it. H2O is what it is. The name that's put into your head when you name your child, even though, I know you're going to turn around and say, oh, well, we named it after the Zeta and the Boba, there's family, there's all sorts of pressure on us to call the child whatever. But if we go back to our reincarnation thoughts, if it's named after the great-grandfather who passed away, there's a good possibility it is the great-grandfather or the great-grandmother. Because reincarnation generally happens in the same family anyway, which is an interesting concept. But you are your name. And therefore, if you get a glimpse in this process I was telling you do when you say the Shemona Esrei every day, it reminds you, you can go and look at that posuk, as I've done, and then study it and what it all means, because it might be particularly relevant to the individual called Yehudah and Rubinstein. So it's really interesting to know exactly who and what you are. I remember my when my first son was born, he was named after my late wife, Shalom's father. So he was called Binyamin. And then we're looking for another name, and he eventually became Binyamin Zev. He lives here in Yerushalayim. Next son that was born, the old Mashgiach of the gate said, Moshe Schwab Zekatzada Ivrocha, that's for Americans after Shimon Schwab's brother. He had passed away, so everybody thought I was going to call my son Moshe, but I didn't like the name Moshe. Don't ask me why. So he wasn't Moshe. And then another son came. I was doing sons in those days. My third son came along, and again people said, "Oh, it's going to be Moshe this time." But again, it just didn't appeal to me, so I called him Eliyahu Eliezer after Rabbi Dessler. Fine. And then when my fourth son came along, we had 4 sons and then 2 daughters. My fourth son came along. I became not well after finishing Yehudah, and I'd overdone it a little bit, and I was physically collapsed. So the doctor said, you really need, when I went to see this doctor in Manchester, called Dr. Royd, he says, nothing wrong with you, nothing at all, except you're on the verge of a physical collapse. I'm more than twice your age, he explained. If I get flu this winter, I'll go over it, you'll get pneumonia. So we needed to have a break. And so where did we go? I mean, you had obviously go to somewhere, it's got spa properties, restful. So we went to Glasgow. In Scotland all the time. And my late wife's family davened in a shul, and the shul rov was somebody called Rabbi Drein, Moshe David Drein. And Rabbi Drein was the Talmud of the Chofetz Chaim. And so, I liked him very, very much. And I was davening in the shul there. I think it was davening at the Omid even. And you've seen those shows, they've got wooden boards and the names of the people who've been nifter in gold paint, that, and they put in a little light bulb. It's not so fashionable anymore, but it used to be a big thing in England, or England and Scotland, I suppose. And I noticed that the gold letters of one of the names were really shining out because it's recently been painted. And it was Rabbi Drein, the rabbi of the shul, had passed away, and I said, Moshe David Drein. I thought, oh, Moshe David. So my wife and I were struggling what name. So I said, what do you think of the name of Moshe David? She said, oh, I like that. I said, guess who Moshe David was? Rabbi Drein. But it was Moshe. The name that I didn't want to name, I had not named 2 children after. It's because they weren't Moshe. But he is Moshe David. And whatever that means, and Rabbi Drein never had any children. It was £1,000 waiting for the first person to name a child after him. And there was somebody before me. But my son is Moshe David. The names that you are, that's who and what you are. So if you want to get a glimpse into yourself, then if Rabbi Meir was around, he's gone, of course, and then somebody could, as it were, if they were expert in this, and there are very few of those, then they might be able to tell you, the reason you're not getting on, because your name suggests a very strong, powerful personality, and the other one is submissive. So that's you're overwhelming your wife or the husband, I suppose, and therefore that would be the advice that we give because you are your name. I just came back from America. I was saying shame for an organization called Gateways that I've worked for about 30 years, and one of the other speakers there was the outstandingly brilliant and I think quite unique Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz, who's absolutely fabulous, and we've lectured together for many, many years. I'm a great admirer of him as a person, and medically, and of course, as a rabbi, he's one of these people that he's got it all. I think the phrase is a polymath. And he said something which I sat in one of his shiurim, and he very kindly, my shiur was after his, then suddenly I noticed he was sitting in mine, because he's also South African and he's very polite. So if I sat in his, he's going to sit in mine. But in his shiur, he said, if you want a glimpse of who and what you are, a good test is to ask yourself the question, what would you want most in the world? Pause. What would I really want most in the world? Now, don't talk about world peace and all that stuff. That's stupid. What do you want in the world? He said most people is just not to have to get up in the morning, just lie in bed and stuff. But what do you really want? If you get it down to what you really want, that's a very good insight into exactly who you are. If you want money, then maybe there's a problem. If you want, success and fame, that's another problem. But everybody wants to know exactly who they are and what their tachlis is. Yeah. So, I thought we'd go into this in a little bit of Kabbalistic detail because it's an intriguing idea, and Rabbi Tatz is always quoting Kabbalah, so He's inspired me. So in Parshas, this is my favorite Hasidic sefer. It's called the Shem Mishmuel. The Shem Mishmuel says an incredibly interesting thing. And this is in the beginning of Parshas Kitetzi. It's his first essay in Parshas Kitetzi. And he says, I'm not going to tell you the whole thing because it'd be too lengthy, but he quotes the Rambam. I'll read a little bit to you. The Rambam says the following thing. We're going to be visiting the Rambam again in a second. And this is in his Parish in the Mishnayos at the end of Makos. And he says, if one person, any Jew, was to be Mekayim, was to fulfill just one mitzvah perfectly. If one person was to do one mitzvah, then guess what? It would be Harihu ben Olam Haba. You get to Olam Haba. Interesting idea. Any problems with that idea? Strikes you? How many mitzvahs are there? 613, right? So you flopped in 612. But one you've got right. That sounds not quite right. And so I'll read to you a little bit what he says here. This is continuing the Rambam. That's why Hashem gave us so many mitzvahs, 613, because surely you could get one right. I mean, not speaking Lashon Hora, might be a bit of a struggle, right? And never losing your temper, all that sort of stuff. But maybe there's one mitzvah you could do with proper gavona and make it, as it were, your mitzvah. And that gets you to Olam Haba. That's why Hashem gave you so many mitzvahs, so that you could get sort of like one. They're kosher, and says the Shem Mishmuel, that's very strange. Halo Ram Reshma Mches, it's to say, how many positive mitzvahs are there? 248. Right? And there's 248 parts of the body. Right? Well, 365, 248. And we know that we've got this Jewish idea that if you do a mitzvah, you're paralleling some part of your physical body, right? You're not speaking Lashon Hara, you're perfecting your mouth, as it were. You're putting tefillin in your arm, you're perfecting the arm. That sort of stuff. Very simplistically, but that will do. So what would you think of, you've got a person who's got a body which is diseased, 613ths. How good a body would that be? I mean, it's Yiskadav Gadash time, no? So he says, how could that possibly be? Because hello, Ram Resh Memches and Mrs. Stehin Keneged Evorim. Shabbat with Tzorach Odom Lasas Kulam Zachas Evorim. You've got to do all the 248 positive mitzvahs in order to perfect that part of your body, which makes sense. So how could it possibly help if you do one mitzvah? And again, you see the same idea of Moshe Rabbeinu. He wanted to go into the land of Israel because of some mitzvahs that he couldn't do unless he's in the land of Israel, because he wants to perfect them all. So what does that mean? If you do one mitzvah, then that's getting you to Olam Haba. So then he goes on and says an obvious thing. Can you think of anybody who could do all the mitzvahs? Did anybody do all the mitzvahs? Why not? Excellent, good. You're not right. Okay. So as this is obviously a women's share, I can't do women's mitzvahs, right? So there are mitzvahs that are for women and mitzvahs which are for men, and I can't do them because I'm not a woman. And there are mitzvahs for kohanim, as you said, and I can't do it because I'm not a kohen. And then Levian. Oh, how about kings? Right? Kings. And then there's mitzvahs and farmers. But you need to have a farm. And I don't have that, right? And there's also some mitzvahs you've got to do if you own animals, right? Which I don't do. There's so many mitzvahs that it's simply impossible for us to do. Because I can't be you and you can't be me. So how on earth can anybody fulfill all of those? So the answer is a very, very interesting and intriguing answer. And he says, it's really quite simple. As long as we are part of Klal Yisrael, and that's the general formula for Klal Yisrael, is Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. They were all part of each other. There's a tiny little bit of you and me, and a tiny little me and you. Then that means to say that if you're perfecting one mitzvah, whatever that mitzvah would be, and I'm perfecting another mitzvah, and you're perfecting a third mitzvah, and we're all part of Klal Yisrael, then in aggregate, all together, then guess what? Then I am 613 perfected, because of I've got my own one mitzvah, but you've got your one mitzvahs, and together, then that allows me to fulfill the idea. The Alshich says, this is an astonishing thing, the Alshich says even more than that. The Alshich says that's why in Parshas Nitzavim, Nitzavim, it says, Atem Nitzavim Kulchem Hayom. You're all standing here today. It says your fathers, your elders, etc., etc. Everybody we believe was there, and of course it's the same as Matan Torah. In Matan Torah, every Jew was there, so we were there. It's just we don't actually remember it, but we were actually there. And at this moment in Jewish history, when Moshe is giving his farewell address to the Jewish people, then guess what? Everybody was there as well. We were there. But the Alshich says, the Medrash says that it's not just saying all the future generations were there, but the past generations were there as well. Zakein, that means, and your fathers, that means the fathers of the Jewish people. That means Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel, and Leah. Well, what were they doing there? After all, they've lived their lives. They're already nifta. They're in Olam Haba. So why did they have to be there? And the answer is because there is, first of all, there's no such thing as time in heaven. And the same way as we just said, if you are doing your mitzvahs that I can't do, then I get the schus of them, and vice versa. Then it's the same for Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. There's mitzvahs they couldn't possibly do because the Torah was not given. The quality of the mitzvahs they did was a different quality of mitzvah. So they were there because then we were giving them zuchusim that they couldn't have got or gained in their own time. And that's an incredible idea when we bear in mind that what we do, how it affects our parents. And it might not just be because we give them zuchusim because we're their children and we're doing all sorts of good stuff. It could be that yes, we are doing good stuff, but we're doing a certain kind of good stuff that was simply impossible for them to do. Because they were in a shtetl in Poland. They couldn't live in Yerushalayim. They can do the mitzvahs that we can do because we now live in Eretz Yisrael. So we're spanning generations and time. So that's how that could work as well. Interesting Kabbalistic idea. But in this idea, incidentally, there's Rabbi Dessler was famous in his advocacy of the Litvaks learning Hasidic Asurim. And indeed in Gateshead, where of course Rabbi Dessler's teachings that's when they first became fully flourished. Then, to this day, the center of Lithuanian yeshivas post-war in Europe was in Gateshead. And yet Hasidic Asurim are learned there. And vice versa. In the Hasidic world, of course, apart from learning Kabbalistic or Hasidic texts, they also learn Gemara the same way as we do. There's been a coming together of this. And so, I always find that these two Sforim, which are, you would think, totally different. Here is, that'll make a nice noise. This is the Shem Shmuel, and this is Das Chochmah und Musar of somebody called Rabbi Yerucham, who was a Mashgiach of Mir. Rabbi Yerucham Lebovitz, or Lebovitz, depending how they pronounce it. But I find that these two very, very often tackle the same themes and come to very, very similar conclusions. As I said before, it's always good stuff if you've got the Hasidim and the Litvaks laying claim to it. So, the Shem Mishmuel says that one mitzvah we can share in, and because we're sharing it, then we can fulfill it. But this, and of course the title of the shiur is Yehudah's approach to Yom Kippur and how to follow it. Because when you come into Yom Kippur, then we really want to get it right. Rosh Hashanah was when we crowned Hashem Yisbarach. It's not really, Rosh Hashanah is not really about tshuva. The Aseres made tshuva and Yom Kippur, that's tshuva. Rosh Hashanah is just getting it right and knowing that you're talking to Hashem and He's Avinu Malkeinu and all that sort of stuff. That's putting it in focus. And as my Rosh Yeshiva, Blade Gurvitz, pointed out, I may have mentioned this to you before as well, intriguing idea, isn't it strange that it's that way round? Rosh Hashanah is the Yom HaDin. And then Yom Kippur comes 10 days later. But shouldn't it be that way around? After all, normally you prepare for an exam before the exam. So wouldn't it be good to have Yom Kippur first, and then we've got 10 days to get ready for the Yom Hadin? Why is it that way around? And the answer, he said, is because Hashem made it that way around because he wants us to pass this test. And I've told you before that the first Yom Hadin, the first Rosh Hashanah, and the first person to be put on trial was, of course, Adam HaRishon. And after the trial, he said to him, remember to tell your children and tell them to tell their children and all the generations of children that I didn't set up Rosh Hashanah in order to find you guilty. I set it up to find you not guilty, not to convict, but to acquit. And Hashem wants us to be acquitted so much that he sets it up this way. Rosh Hashanah comes first because he knows if you make Rosh Hashanah at the end, some people just might leave the tshuva process to the last minute. Some people do that sort of stuff. I always say to my younger Talmidim, let me give you a piece of sage advice. If you hear somebody is sitting Shiva, go straight away. Because you'll generally find if you say, I'll go tomorrow, something happens tomorrow, and then I'll go the next day, and then something else happens, and before you know it, they've got up from Shiva, and you've missed it. And even though you go and apologize and say, I was so busy, I was doing this, that, and the other, people won't remember why you didn't come, they'll just remember that you didn't come. So, grab the moment, carpe diem, as they say. So here is the moment to grab hold of, but he knows that people might not do it. So if he makes Rosh Hashanah the Yom Hadin first, right, and I've already been judged, maybe I didn't do too well, and you get 10 days to put it right, that might be the motivation that will make you do that. So that's Hashem clearly on our side. But here there is, as we're saying, the approach of Yehudah. Now, very often a person finds himself, and I told you that I find myself this far too often. In fact, I even put in my master a list of things that I want to apologize for. And one year when I did that, remember, a previous year's list fell out. I think it was from 5 years before. And when I picked it up and compared the two lists, identical, right? And so if you want to put it right, see, the problem is that very often we're trying to solve the problem in the same way. But I think it was Einstein that said the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expect different results. Consequently, it certainly behooves us to try and find a new approach if that's happening. And if you can't think of a new approach for yourself, then sit down with some Rebbitzin or some rabbi and say, look, I keep failing at this. And incidentally, you should never be embarrassed about this, because first of all, there's nothing generally you can go to a decent rabbi about that he's not heard before, or a Rebbitzin's not heard before. In fact, they probably have been through the same problem themselves before, in which case they're particularly effective in helping you. But if you're doing the same thing over and over again and getting no results, I mean, if you go and see the doctor and he gives you pink tablets, and you're supposed to be better after a week and you're not, and he gives you more pink tablets, and then the third week you're getting more pink tablets, it's time to change the doctor. The guy's an idiot. The pink tablet's not working. You want the blue tablets, or the purple tablets, or whatever it is. You need something different. You need a different approach. So if that's the case, then it might be that you sort of like want to throw in the towel, etc. There is a different approach that you can try. The first simple approach, Rabbi Dessler says, is burning down the bridges. Burning down the bridges. What does that mean? Generally, when we find ourselves falling into the same trap or mistake over and over again, it's generally, if you think about it, there's generally a trigger. There's generally a catalyst which trips you up. Most of us have a weakness in certain areas. Rav Shlomo Wolbe says when a person is young, taiva is a big problem. But when a person gets older, great news, taiva retreats. Well, that's it. Olam haba. No, but then gaiva increases. Yeah. That young whippersnapper, what does he know? Let me tell you, kid. That sort of stuff. And then you've got to deal with gaiva. So basically, what is the trigger? What triggers you and gets you into trouble? If you were young, if you were seminary girls back in the day, and particularly if you were Yeshiva Bochrim, what triggers you into getting into trouble? So if you're worrying about taiva, then you would say, well, maybe it's bad company. Maybe it's a bad place. Maybe it's the internet, right? What is it that is my trigger? So Rabbi Dessa says, the best way to deal with this is to burn down the bridge that leads you from where you are into where you don't want to be. If you can just burn down that bridge. So you get rid of the internet, or you get rid of the friend, or you make sure you never go near that place that's a bad influence and draws you in. That's a good start. Now, of course, you've not changed yourself, have you? You just made sure that you know I've got a weakness, so I'll avoid that. But really, I still desire that sort of thing, whatever the thing is, taiva, whatever, gaiva, whatever. So, but it's a good technique to just know that's where my weakness lies. That's what I have to, this is dealing with the negative. This is what I need to do in order to negate that negative. Negate that negative? Sounds awful. To get rid of that negative in order, now, as I say, you've not really changed yourself, but it's a first step, at least. You know, of course, when the Rambam famously says, when you're giving tzedakah, you've got $100 or £100 or 100 shekels. You can give 1 shekel to 100 people in shul. Daily event, incidentally, Ryan Davin. Or you can give 100 shekel note to a guy who make a big difference in your life, in their life. So what should you do? You give 100 shekels. Shekel donations. Why? Because the action of giving the 100 shekels, you're mechanic yourself in the act of giving. It becomes muscle memory or soul memory. So you keep doing it over and over and over again. It becomes easy. So it's not, and then it becomes automatic. So if you find yourself tempted because of temper, or all the things that we know about, then if you can avoid, you can stop yourself doing it. You're still a sort of angry type person, but you've taken away the triggers. But maybe over time that becomes who you become. That's one approach. But there's a very, very interesting Rebbe Yerucham here. And he talks about Yehudah. So it goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this year, which is all about names. You are your name. So Yehudah was called Yehudah. Why? Do you remember the reason why Yehudah get called Yehudah? Gratitude, good. And what was the gratitude? Yeah, a little bit more than that. Right, that's right. So basically, all Yaakov's wives were all Nevios. And they all knew that their husband was meant to be the father of 12. And therefore, if there are 4 wives, then logically, then they could expect to be the mother of 3. When Leah had her 4th son, then she realized she got an extra brocha, an extra blessing for Hashem, and she gave Holiest, thanks to Hashem for the fact that this great miracle has happened. Great blessing has come to her. And she called Yehudah. The name Yehudah means giving Holiest to Hashem. So to have the koyach of Holiest is a tremendous midah. When you get something, a koras hatov is, according to Chaim Friedlander, the most fundamental of all Jewish midas. You know that because the first thing Hashem said to us when we heard Him speak to us directly was, "Anachi Hashem Elokecha, asher hotzichu me'eretz Yisrael." I'm the Lord your God who took you out from Egypt. So accept me and accept the Torah. You owe me one. And knowing that Hakaras Hatov is a fundamental Jewish midah, then that would trigger that response, and the Jewish people would say Nasim Nishma, which is what happened. So it's absolutely fundamental. And Leah has that midah, and therefore when this extra blessing comes along, then she calls herself Yehudah, calls her son Yehudah, and that's the story of Yehudah. Fine. And because of the fact that names are significant, and because we know that each one has a different name, and each name also there's a flag for each tribe, which spell out their role, right? The design of the flag was echoed the blessing that the tribe got. So each tribe's got a different role. What was Yehudah's role? The king, the royal household. The royal household. So Yehudah is fitting to be the king because he inherited a midah from his mother. But what did he do? That's very nice. But what did he do? Sorry? A nature which is willing to give haidah and express gratitude and a chorus of taiv when things come along. And that's when you see that when Yehudah is confronted by his daughter-in-law, and what does he say in public? Yeah, I'm the father, and she's, Saul's coming in, she's greater than me. Right? So somebody is willing to accept. Now that's an incredibly important midah for a king to have. Because what's that phrase in English? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Caligula, the Roman emperor, made his horse a god. Bonkers. But generally, you see in the ancient world particularly, even in the modern world as well, rulers who don't get voted out after 8 years or 10 years, whatever it is, tend to get a little bit warped. Power does that. So it's very important of a king who's not going to say, I don't need to give thanks to anybody because I'm the king. I am a self-made man. I always loved that concept. A self-made man. No mother, no father. You simply emerged out of the ether. You just made yourself. Right? So you've got no hakar satov to anybody. It's very important for a king to have a midah. And he's got this essential midah, and he got it from his mother. But what did he do? Sorry? Well, this is what he says in the Rabbi Yerucham, and it's so important, and it's such a tool for life. If you want to discover who you are, and you want to maximize that, you'll find that in maximizing that basic nature that you have, everything else will fall into place. So there's a medrash, and the medrash says, Rabbi Yerucham, it says that if somebody is makbid always to have a place for himself in shul. Some people love shul. Davening, always there, got their place. Not necessarily as machers in the shul. It's not necessarily a healthy thing to be. But just they like talking to God. Right? Then when that person passes away, the Medrash says they'll say about him, I'm trying to, how much did I pay for my shul membership now that I moved to Jerusalem? Was it $600? Is that right? Can that be right? I don't know. Maybe $600. Let's assume it's $600. So for paying for $600, the Medrash says when you pass away, when you're 120, when you go up to heaven, they'll say about you, Hai Onov, that humble man. Hai Tzaddik, that saintly man. Mi Talmidim shel Avram Avinu hoyu. He was one of the Talmidim of Avram Avinu. Just because you paid $600. That seems a very cheap ticket to heaven. Right? So, go back to what we were talking about before. What did Yehudah do that allows him to be Roy, to be the founder of the royal household? If it's just something he got from his mother, that's the point. He got it from his mother. And the name expresses that. That's his nature. If that's your nature, if you are your name, then you've got to find out what your name is, as it were, and focus on that, and everything will come from that. So, suppose you have somebody who really likes shul. He likes davening, he likes talking to God. And then after he's made that his big thing, he goes to a shiur, and somebody is talking about the fact there is one thing that Hashem detests and says, I cannot coexist in the world with this one type of thing. Do you know what type of thing is? An arrogant person, a Baal Gaiva. Somebody's a Baal Gaiva. So what this guy, I don't know if I've ever told this one. My late wife, I come from the UK. Are you all familiar roughly with the UK? Okay. Americans, let me, show of hands please. Roughly, okay, right. Okay, so Macy's. Right. And right, Macy's, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, right. My wife prefers Nordstrom, by the way. Nordstrom. I call it Nostril, but never mind. But in England, it's Marks and Spencer's. Oh yes, Marks and Spencer's. And I, for most of my life, got almost all of my clothes from Marks and Spencer's. I don't know what it's like these days, but Marks and Spencer's was a very nice standard of clothing for men, women, boys, girls. Not too cheap, not too expensive. You know, you weren't showing off. It was just nice. And I always wore the exact same thing: a pair of blue pants, a blue jacket, which by coincidence I'm still wearing. Hope you noticed that. Naturally, the white shirt, ultra orthodox. Ties, Marks and Spencer's. Socks, shoes, almost everything. Couldn't get tzitzis. But apart from that, you could get everything from Marks and Spencer's. I remember once I went into the kitchen, and my wife looked at my jacket and she said, it's looking a bit shiny. You know, men's jackets get a bit shiny. I think you could do with a new jacket. I said, oh yeah, you're right. I used to wear a blazer. Gold buttons noch. In Gateshead. Anyway, so I said, okay. So I got into my Volvo and drove into Manchester town centre, which is only 15 minutes from where I lived. And we parked the car and went up and bought the exact same jacket I had worn from, I think, since I was about 16, 17. And I looked at it in the mirror and it looked fine. And so I came back and I went into the kitchen. Wife was still there. And I said, what do you think? What do you think? I mean, almost sleep in this. You know, I shower in this. Anyway, so yeah, fine. Same as normal. As I went into the hall, there was a mirror in the hall, and I was looking at myself, and I thought, yeah, nice. And then I noticed my trousers, my pants. Now, there was absolutely nothing wrong with the pants before I got this nice new jacket. But as soon as I'm wearing the jacket, suddenly they look pretty. So I thought, So back to the Volvo, back to Marks and Spencer's. New pair of pants came out with my new jacket and my new pants. Looking like, now I'm looking cool. The shirt. Now, can I possibly, not have a nice new shirt or 10 to go along with the new jacket and the new pants? And I could really do with a couple of ties, or 12. And then might as well get some underwear while I'm here. Socks are a must. Pair of shoes, right? You end up with a whole new outfit. That's precisely what's going on here as well. You have to find out what and who you are, as it were. What's your natural midah? What did you inherit? Guess what, says Rabbi Yerucham? Your success as a Jew is simply taking what you were given from your parents, from Hashem, whatever it is, as your basic positive nature, the one that comes to you easiest. When we're talking about Moshe Schwab once about the reincarnation thing, I said to him, how are you supposed to put right what you got wrong in a previous life or achieve what you failed to achieve if you can't remember being in the previous life? He said, well, just go home tonight and before you go to sleep at night, I told you this once, just say to yourself, what do I find easiest in Judaism? What do I find worst? When you find the things that you are struggling with, the top 3, that's probably what you messed up last time and what you're here to put right. But you can reverse that as well. What do you find easiest? That's your jacket. That's the jacket. That's the place in shul. Your easy mitzvah is davening. But when you hear some shiur, the rabbi says, but Hashem hates a Baal Gaiva, and you've got a little bit of Gaiva, then you think to yourself, all my prayers, I thought I've been getting through sending texts 3 times a day for all of my life. No, you haven't, because you're a Baal Gaiva. Guess what? Hashem didn't even get your texts. He's blocked you. The only way you can unblock yourself is to work in Gaiva. Right? So the shining diamond in your crown is the fact you like to daven. Next to it, there are jewels which have not been polished or cut, and certainly not in good shape. Now you're going to work in the next one, and suddenly your Iker diamond now makes the one next to it shine as well. Now you get 2, then what about the next one that was just like me? The jacket, the pants, the shirt, ties, and all the rest. It all fits into place if you discover exactly who and what you are, what's your name, what's the H2O of you, what's the basic ingredient, and work in that as your thing. That's my big thing. Because, as the Shem MiShmuel says, just one thing, quotes the Rambam says just one thing, perfect that one mitzvah. Then you can plug yourself into everybody else and still get to Olam Haba. But Rabbi Yerucham takes the idea a step further and says, take that one thing, and you don't have to necessarily draw on other people's. You can cultivate the other midas within yourself. So there's a great idea for Rabbanu Shem. I keep messing up. So this is a life-changing approach. Take the thing that comes easiest to you, that you got from your parents. And so Judaism's not difficult then. All I have to do is to focus on what comes easiest to me. That becomes my jacket, and then that will show up the trousers don't look so good, or the skirt in your case. So the blouse is nice, but the skirt needs replacing, that sort of stuff. And then you eventually get a whole new wardrobe, a whole new outfit. And that's a way forward. So if you really find it difficult to say what you're good at, and I can't imagine that would be too difficult. Some of you already know from before in England and stuff like that, chesed usually comes easily to people. Find out what it is and how you could really take that and make that in this coming year. We've been through 2 tough years. Unless the Mashiach comes, any second, and of course he could, then we can anticipate there might be a couple of bumps in the road in the coming year. So the more zechusim, the more we can do, the more we can be getting it right, the more making a big, big impact towards the holy Jewish people. And don't forget what the Rambam says. The Rambam says at this time of year, you're supposed to imagine a perfectly balanced scales. Right? All the bad things of the Jewish people on one side, and all the good things on the other side. And along comes one Jew, and can tip the scales that way or the other way. Now notice he says one person, one Jew. He doesn't say, along comes one rabbi, one Rebbitzin. Along comes one tzaddik, one tzedekis, and tips the scale. One Jew. And of course, the Gemara in Kedushin famously says, suppose you get somebody who's a Rosh Gomer, well known to be a Rosh Gomer. I mean, famous, I won't mention anybody by name. Horrible person. George Soros, don't mind mentioning him by name. I think he's a Rosh Gomer. Right. Suppose George Soros, type person, comes up to a Jewish woman and he says, Hariyat Mekudeshes li, with a gold ring, Hariyat Mekudeshes li, Al Menashe Ani Tzaddik Gomer. Right? I'm going to marry you on condition that I'm a complete tzaddik. What would you think the halakhic status of that marriage would be? It's a joke, no? He's not a complete tzaddik. He's complete the opposite. Right? The Gemara says, no, she needs a get. If she accepts the ring, you can't force a woman to take a ring. If she accepts the ring, then but if she accepts the ring and it's under false pretenses, it's still not a marriage. But he's a Rosha, so of course it's under false pretenses. No. It could be, says the Gemara, at that one moment, he had a moment of tshuva. That 1 second he became, just for a second, a tzaddik. An ordinary person, not just an ordinary person, a bad person, might tip the scales in the positive direction for Klal Yisrael, just by actually getting it right for a moment. But you're not bad people. We're not bad people. In this coming year, we really want to get this as much as we possibly can right. And it could simply be that by focusing on what we find easiest to do, the real us, we can build out to other stuff and make a bigger contribution at a time when Klal Yisrael needs as many contributions this Yom Kippur as we possibly can have. So let me wish you all a Gemara Sima Toima. Those who've been with me for the last 6 months or so, it's been an absolute delight, and I hope to be carrying this on after your interview. We'll find a nice location here, and I will put up posters, or you can be in touch with Janice. I'll tell Janice so she'll let you know where we're carrying on. Sunday mornings, 10 o'clock, after Sukkot, in a venue near here.
To be decided.
To be decided.